I know you're out there. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
The KrisAnne Hall Show.
Any varmint that crosses that lady's path has met its match. Come
on! Rise and shine, liberty-loving patriots. Welcome to the KrisAnne Hall Show. KrisAnne Hall here, KrisAnnehall.com. Liberty over security, principle over party, truth over your favorite personality. You know what we're about here. We're about bringing contemporary issues into constitutional light, constitutional training. And I, in my hotel yesterday, watched a little bit of C-SPAN. And if you don't watch C-SPAN, you should watch C-SPAN. It gives you a pretty good indication of what's going on in the world today and how Congress works, or rather, doesn't work. And the interesting thing is that Barack Obama said in an interview with John Daly on The Daily Show that our government works better than it has ever worked before. He said it's working better now than ever. He says government works better now than it probably ever has, given what we ask it to do. And, you know, I think that I agree with Barack Obama in that statement. Absolutely. Government working better now than ever. He argued that government agencies were full of people who worked hard and cared about helping people, but admitted that it was slow and oftentimes failed to function properly. Well, you know, if you understand how our government was established by the Constitution, through the states, by the representatives of those states, then you would understand that our government was not supposed to work efficiently. I think that's what Obama means by when he says function properly. He means function efficiently. Well, it's not supposed to. Government is not supposed to work quickly. It is supposed to work slowly. It is supposed to be limited in its power to such an extent that it has to work very, very, very hard to get things done. There should be much debate. Hours, days, weeks of debates over legislation before it's passed. Do you know the most important legislation passed, next to what happened on July 2nd, 1776. We'll talk about that in a minute. Took 5 years to pass. It took 5 years to ratify the Constitution of the United States. What could possibly happen in Washington, D.C. that would be more important than that? Now, I'm not saying every piece of legislation should take 5 years, because obviously every piece of legislation is not as important as the Constitution of the United States. I'm just saying that government is not supposed to be rushing through legislation and passing things, you know, so we can read it. But we have a problem in our system, and that system is working better than ever. And that should really, really concern us. Our government should not be working better than ever. Our government should be slower than ever. It should be more limited than ever. And our government should be operating according to the will of the people more than ever. Only that's not happening. Case in point, my little journey with C-SPAN yesterday. So what they were arguing about, the debate on the floor, was H.R. 1734. And this was a bill on how to deal with coal resources. Okay, so coal ash disposal regulations what is what this bill is all about. Now, obviously, you have your Republican versus Democrat argument. This is a straight line, Democrat versus Republican, because unfortunately, it's an environmental issue, a conservation issue, and a state issue. We heard in my little stint, I'm sure there were more that spoke, but this is all that I witnessed. Representative Kevin Creamer, a Republican from North Dakota. Representative Evan Jenkins, a Republican from West Virginia. Representative Larry Bucshon, a Republican from Indiana. And Representative David McKinley, a Republican from West Virginia. And they are arguing in favor of this legislation, H.R. 1734. And their argument in favor of this bill is couched in the idea that they want to give the states more control over their local resources and local industries. They want to give, through this legislation, the states more control over their local resources and their local businesses. Okay? Give them through legislation. I just want that to sink in a little bit. Because remember, we're talking about a system that does not work, that works too well in its own operation. And that's not working for us. So the argument that we get is that the feds are now allowing the states to comply with the EPA. Right? So the whole thing is that the EPA says the states are not meeting their standards in the way that the EPA wants them to. The Democrats say, well, the states can prove to the EPA that they are meeting the federal standards. Did you catch that? The states can prove to the EPA that they are living up to the federal standards. So we don't need this legislation. The Republicans say, we need this legislation so that the states will not be totally controlled by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Well, just partially controlled, not totally controlled. Puts the states in control of their own resources and their own businesses. Almost. And the Democrats say the states can't handle their own resources. They can't manage their own resources. And they cannot regulate their own businesses because they're not capable. And so I want us to think about this, because this is the broken system trying to fix itself. I want to mention that the representatives that I mentioned, Creamer, Jenkins, Bucshon, and McKinley, are attempting to argue in favor of state control. Almost. But the Democrats are arguing that the federal government knows best. And this is the best argument that we can get in Washington, D.C. Full government, federal government power over the states, or the states can have a little bit of control. This is why a federal system working does not work. You see, they can't possibly stand up and make the argument that the states are sovereign. and that the states don't have to submit to the EPA. I want to mention to you, not a single one of them, Kramer, Jenkins, Bouchon, or McKinley, ever mentioned that the EPA does not constitutionally exist. There was never any caveat, well, the EPA shouldn't exist. There is no constitutional, what's the word that I'm looking for? There is no constitutional establishment of an EPA. There is no room for that. That is a power. Environment is a power that was reserved to the states. But given light of that and working within the system that we have, this is how we want to slowly, through creep, restore state sovereignty. I don't understand why somebody couldn't have made that little caveat. I suppose because if they had, they would have been immediately labeled as an extremist by both parties. And then their position would be completely discounted. Because guess what? State sovereignty and following the Constitution is a completely radical position in Congress. First off, Congress has forgotten who they represent. The House of Representatives forgets that they represent the people, and the Senate forgets that they represent the sovereignty of the states. Obviously, they have to have forgotten that because in 1913 we ratified the 17th Amendment and made them, representatives of the federal government instead. But the interesting thing here is how far we've come and how radical the foundation of our government is seen to our government. See, if I were to run for office, it would be a completely different story. And I'm afraid my campaign for office would be something that would guarantee I would not be elected. It's a campaign on why you shouldn't vote for me. Don't vote for me if you like the status quo. Don't vote for me if you like the way government's working. Don't vote for me if you like the EPA, the FBI, or the Department of Education. And that's what my campaign would sound like.
KrisAnne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
It's interesting. I think that we should look into this a little bit more because I have people all the time, every single day, multiple times a day on Facebook and Twitter and as I meet and I speak saying, KrisAnne, you must run for office. We need you in Washington, D.C. I don't think that would go over so well, my running for office. Because my campaign would, I wouldn't run as a party. And the parties would both attack me. Because I would not be supporting the status quo. As a matter of fact, that would be my campaign. If you like the status quo, then don't vote for me. If you want me to go up there and play the games, then don't vote for me. As a matter of fact, if you vote for me, I am going to go up there and I'm going to give long educational speeches. I am going to go up there and vote against every single piece of legislation that supports anything that the federal government is not entitled to do by Constitution. Which means I am going to vote against every education bill. I am going to vote against every environmental bill. I am going to vote against nearly every national security bill unless it has to do with real foreign relations and not national security upon the people. I am going to vote against every FDA regulation. I am going to vote against every funding of the FDA, of the EPA, of the Department of Education, of the Bureau of Land Management, of the Department of Interior. I am going to vote against every single one of these budgets that funds these people. I am going to vote against every piece of legislation that allows the president to be funded in his executive orders. I am going to be proposing on a regular basis the impeachment of many, many government officials, whether I have to stand on the floor and do it my own. As a matter of fact, I will not submit myself to authority within the political party, which means when the Speaker of the House refuses to allow any of my legislation to come before committees, I will then take my pieces of legislation before the press, and I will point out that the leader of the Republican Party, he's not even the leader of the House, he's the leader of the Republican Party in the House, refuses to allow my constituents equal representation within the House because this is the legislation that my constituents want to see, and they are being refused their equal representation. I will do that in front of the press. I will call out everything that I see. I will take pictures. I will write down names. I will take notes, and I will record conversations. And I will be assassinated. I will be called into the office of the head of national security. They will give me no ability to read any legislation. They will give me no ability to see anything. I will have no security clearance whatsoever. I will have no committee appointments at all. My sole job in going to the House of Representatives will be to be a whistleblower and to be a representative for the Constitution, the oath that I took, and the people that elected me to be there. How long do you think it would take before I was run out of a campaign like that? How long would it take if by some miracle I was actually allowed to win? How long would it take for me to actually exist in Congress before I was somehow eliminated? If they couldn't assassinate me, isn't this crazy? I'm actually contemplating the fact that they would assassinate someone. No, our government would never do that. Not only that, how long before they created some kind of scandal to trash my name in the public? Something that was completely and totally false. But I wouldn't have the political parties to back me to get out of it. You see, my campaign would be liberty over security, principle over party, and truth over your favorite personality. I am not going to submit to the status quo. And I will not accept that this is the reality of the system that we must deal with. Because guess what? Americans don't accept their reality. They change it.
So don't let them steal your light. Don't let them break your stride. There is light on the other side. You'll see all the raindrops falling. It's a revolution.
The KrisAnne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
So, how many of you read Frederick Bastiat's The Law? Frederick Bastiat also wrote a document called The Seen and That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen. He wrote that in 1850. And there's an interesting, excuse my voice there for a second, there's an interesting paragraph within that. My husband posted it on his Facebook page, and I want to repeat it to you. Because we're talking about this argument before Congress that I witnessed on C-SPAN. Remember, the argument is that the Republicans say we need to give the states more power to regulate their own industries and conserve their own resources. The Democrats' argument is we can't do that because they can't handle that kind of responsibility. Now, we need to pick up some wisdom from history and stop claiming that these guys are a bunch of dead guys who have written irrelevant documents, because the truth of the matter is human nature never changes, and we're repeating history. We're repeating precisely our history, frighteningly precisely. And so here's what Bastiat said. Our adversaries consider that an activity which is neither aided by supplies nor regulated by government is an activity destroyed. We think just the contrary. Their faith is in the legislature, not mankind. Ours is in mankind, not in the legislature. According to their way of thinking, not to support is to abolish, because setting it upon the maxim that nothing exists independently of the will of the state, they conclude that nothing lives but what the state causes to live. Now, Bastiat is using that word state not in the framework of, Rhode Island, North Dakota, and West Virginia. He's using that word state in the form of government. So what Bastiat is saying is that those in government believe that if they have not aided the functioning or regulated the functioning, then that activity is completely destroyed. Basically, you didn't build that. We, who support liberty, think quite to the contrary. Our faith is not in the legislature. Our faith is in mankind. Our faith is in the understanding that people want to conserve their resources. We were given stewardship over this earth, and we are required to be good stewards of that. Individuals, through greed and lack of consideration and moral decay, will want to destroy resources for their profit. But the people as a whole, mankind as a whole, understand that we must preserve our resources. The problem becomes when the government rules over mankind. When government rules over mankind rather than mankind ruling over government, then we are left with our adversaries controlling our environment. And I don't mean that from trees and spotted owls. I mean everything. Realize this. Government is supposed to be our adversaries because their faith is in government. That is not how liberty works. Liberty has faith in mankind. Liberty gives power to the people and takes power from government. And so our adversaries are in control. Our adversaries tell us you didn't build that. Our adversaries say you can't build that unless we say so. You can't maintain that unless we say so. And then we turn our faith to government to fix all our problems. Hey, 10 minutes watching a debate on the House floor should be evidence enough that government is never going to fix itself. My goodness, they can't even move the meter by minute degrees away from government control back to the control of the people. Think about that for a moment. That whole coal thing illustrates exactly what Bastiat is saying. Our adversaries are in control. And they're, according to the commander-in-chief, operating better than they've ever operated before. Absolutely right. government is operating exactly the way it wants to, and it's never operated better in its own eyes. We are now watching our government overturning the will of the people. The House is set to vote. I wish I could watch this on C-SPAN. I don't know if I'll be able to. The House is set to vote on an anti-GMO labeling law. Please find for me the language in the Constitution which expressly enumerates the power of the federal government to tell us how we can and cannot label our merchandise. The House of Representatives is set to vote today on a hotly debated measure that would block mandatory labeling of foods with genetically engineered crops, including preempting a state law in Vermont. It's dubbed the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act by supporters, but those who do not support this bill call it the Deny Americans the Right to Know, or DARK Act. Hello? There is no authority in the Constitution for the government to tell us how we should or should not label our foods. But I want you to think about this. This is going to be a very, very, very telling piece of legislation. How will this legislation pass? If it passes, it won't be because of the people. It will be because of the corporations who run the GMOs, who don't want you to know what labeling, don't want you to know through labeling that they're feeding you genetically modified food. But here's the crazy thing. The House of Representatives believes that if they pass this law, they can overturn the state law. Oh, you know that supremacy clause thing, right? Well, the supremacy clause does not make every law that Congress makes supreme. It only makes laws that Congress makes supreme when they are in compliance to the Constitution. Go read it. Read the whole thing. And you see that. Laws are limited by the Constitution. There is no authority expressly delegating a power to the federal government to control labeling of food, or labeling of anything for that matter. Therefore, this law, even if passed, has no legal authority, and Vermont should just go ahead and do what they want. As a matter of fact, every state should go on and do what they want, because these laws have no effect. Same with the Iran deal. Susan Rice admits that there are secret side deals that go along with this deal with Iran. Please tell me, within the Constitution, how the president has the power to create any foreign deals outside treaties and 2/3 ratification of the Senate. You can't find that power in the Constitution because it does not exist. And which means this Iran deal is made outside the Constitution, which means it has no legal authority, which means the states have every power and every right and every duty to simply deny this Iran deal as any force of law or power. The state should simply say, we are not going to comply with this Iran deal. The government can bolster and huff and puff all they want, but we're not going to comply because it was not made pursuant to the Constitution. There was no ratification by 2/3 of the Senate. This was not a treaty. This was an international executive order, and executive orders have no authority at all. And so you have now John Boehner, huffing and puffing, will do, quote, everything possible, end quote, to stop the Iran deal. Everything possible. Really? Just like you did everything possible to stop executive amnesty? Obama is now promising that he's going to propose more unilateral immigration actions. Did you do everything possible to stop that? Because it's still continuing. I wonder what the definition of everything possible is to John Boehner. I wonder, is crying and begging everything possible? Is having another congressional hearing everything possible. Maybe this time we'll stop begging and pleading Obama and we'll start begging and pleading Secretary of State John Kerry. Maybe we can cry to him. We're going to do everything possible to stop it. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Boehner, and you can pass it on to Mr. McConnell. Everything possible is exactly what you should do, and everything possible is what you can do. As a matter of fact, included in that everything possible is to remove any funding for this deal whatsoever. Simply write Iran a letter and say, look, our president, I'm sorry, didn't have the authority to make this deal. It's happened before. When Lincoln was president, the Secretary of War sent John Cook a letter that said, I'm sorry, the president made a deal that he wasn't authorized to make, so we're not going to honor that deal and you'll get no funding from us. So the precedent has already been set, even with their beloved Lincoln. So now Boehner and McConnell can write a letter to Iran and say, I'm sorry, our president didn't have the authority to make the deal that he just made, and so there'll be no funds associated with this deal, so it's not a deal at all. That's power number one. Power number two is they write a letter to every governor and say, guess what? We need to inform you this deal was not ratified by the Senate, therefore it is no deal at all, and therefore you are released from any authority, any obligation, and any power that this deal might wield over you. Everything possible.
Hate me if you want, or love me if you can. If the truth is what you want, then you found your man. I ain't backing down, I ain't backing up. If you think like I think, then crack it on up. I won't back up, I don't back down. I've been raised up to stand my ground. Take my job, but not my guns. Tax my check till I ain't got none, except for the good Lord up above. I answer to no one.
The KrisAnne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
I wonder how complicated everything possible will become when everything possible simply just needs a letter. Oh, but KrisAnne, you don't know how that works. It's simply not that simple. I mean, we'll be asking for war with Iran with a letter like that. We'll make a mockery of our president. Better a mockery of our president than a mockery of our Constitution. What do you think? I mean, that's exactly what's happening. Obama has declared our Constitution a mockery. And we're supposed to sit by and allow that to happen because we cannot overturn the apple cart. We can't be so radical as to actually enforce the Constitution because that's not how the system works. Well, I already told you, I am not here to maintain the system. And that makes me radical. That makes me unrealistic. I'm not here to maintain the system. I'm here to teach how the Constitution is supposed to work so that maybe we'll have the courage and the boldness to actually stand up and do that. I mean, really, somebody's going to have to, because we're not going to get back by degrees, and we're certainly not going to get back by trusting the legislature. That's what governments do. That's what our adversaries do. See, we need to be teaching our states, these are the powers and these are the limitations. Because we're not going to fix Washington, D.C. All those things that I said that Boehner and McConnell should do are not going to be done. They're simply not. They can't do it. It's not how the system is functioning now. So the only real remedy will be through the states and through the local governments. That's the only real remedy. Hey, the House press secretary made an amazing announcement yesterday. Press Secretary Josh Earnest said the Republicans have, quote, no one to blame but themselves for what's happening with illegal immigrant crimes. And I happen to agree with Josh Earnest. The Republicans have no one to blame but themselves. The blood of 32-year-old Catherine Steinle is on the hands of our Republicans. Because guess what? Through Article 1, Section 7, the Republican simple majority in the House could have defunded all of these executive amnesties a long time ago and returned the power of enforcement back to the states. The federal government doesn't have a constitutional authority to enforce immigration. They only have the constitutional authority to establish standard immigration laws. It is up to the states to enforce them. And now, the Republicans have no one to blame but themselves, and the blood is on their hands. Because the power is in their hands to stop it. To stop it very simply. But that's not how the system works anymore. The system works too well in favor of the government, in favor of government funding, and in favor of government power, and not in favor of the people in the Constitution. So where do we have this now? We have a House voting on anti-GMO labeling laws. We have a House voting to try to restore just a little bit of power to the states, but maintain the EPA's regulation over our coal industries. We have the federal government supporting secret deals outside the Constitution with promises that they'll do everything they can to stop it. We have a president who is writing executive orders like journal entries in his diary and promising to do even more. And then we have a Congress and a House of Representatives who is funding all of this, who literally has no one to blame but himself. And here we have a government working better than it's ever worked before. Don't you think it's about time that we throw the brakes on this thing? Don't you think it's about time that we make the government a little bit less efficient and a little bit more constitutional? Hey, it just takes the people to stand up and say so. God bless. See you tomorrow.
Something down if you get it our way.